Okay, hello there, everyone out in GMAT Club land. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. No matter where you are in the world, I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. And also thank you so much to my good friends at GMAT Club for inviting me here to speak with you. Just super quick before we get started, if during the course of today's presentation you learned something new or cool or something that makes you say, wow, that's interesting, I would love for you to give a little like to this video, just because that tells GMAT Club that you like my content, and then they will ask me back to give you even more content. So just a heads up before we jump in. So good morning, my name is Maria, and today we are going to be talking about MBA rankings. MBA rankings, they're super popular. People get so obsessed over them, and yet, should they be obsessed over them? I don't know. Okay, are my slides appearing? Oh, I'm magical. As soon as I said it, it happened. Incredible. All right. So MBA rankings, the point of my talk with you today is I want you to take them with a grain of salt. So first of all, who am I? Hi there. I'm Maria. That's a picture of me. I am a 2005 graduate of Harvard Business School. I have been giving admissions advice for almost 17 years. And I am the founder of ApplicantLab.com. So I don't know if you've started looking into these folks called MBA admissions consultants. Basically, what we as consultants do is we help guide you through the pitfalls and the strategies that you're going to want to use to get accepted. Most other admissions consultants charge thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. When I started thinking about becoming an admissions consultant, that didn't quite sit right with me. So I decided to create a software platform that takes all of my best guidance, but puts it into an affordable software platform so that way anyone can access it, even if they don't have thousands of dollars. With that out of the way, I want to start off by telling you what my goal is for our time today. So my goal for today, I am not going to spend this time obsessing over countless little methodology details. Yeah, we're going to start comparing some of the different methodologies. I'm going to show you a few things that I think are interesting that you might want to take into account. But we're not going to spend our time here like digging into the nitty gritty of, well, what the Financial Times ranking versus the Economist ranking. Like, that's not my goal for today, because first of all, you're smart. I know you. You're smart. You're super like sharp, and you've got a lot of energy. You can do that part on your own, number one. Number two, the other reason I'm not going to delve into that is how boring. Oh my God, how boring. Even I wouldn't want to hear myself talk for an hour about the methodology. So if I don't want to hear it, I don't think you want to hear it either. Instead, what I want to talk about is I want you to leave today's presentation with a much more pragmatic, something that's actually useful, right? A more pragmatic way of looking at the rankings so that you can become a better consumer of them, or a more critical thinker of what role should rankings play in my decision-making process of which schools to apply to. So here's what we're going to cover today, sort of a quick little heads up agenda. We're going to look at why do the rankings change from year to year. That's kind of weird, right? And what do the rankings actually measure? And I think here's sort of the crux of my presentation today. Do the rankings really capture what matters? And then finally, some sort of takeaways for you to kind of stew over and to marinate in your head as you continue through this process. So I think one of the first things I want to point out is that the rankings themselves, the generation of rankings, the creation of rankings, and the annual publishing of rankings are big business. Usually most websites that have some sort of a division or a section devoted to MBA, anything related to the MBA process, the rankings are usually their most heavily trafficked page, one of the most heavily, if not the most heavily trafficked page that they get in any given year. And even if you're not an internet web guru, even you should realize that clicks means more advertising dollars, more advertisers get interested, and that way the site makes more money. So the more people click on an article about rankings, the more money that publisher is bound to make. In fact, in US News' case, they explicitly charge you to access the details of the ranking. It's called Grad Compass. It is $30 a year. It allows you to dig into more of the details. And so they're pretty upfront about trying to monetize their rankings. quick little side tip on the US news rankings, if you go to Upgrade to Grad Compass, like go to their upgrade page and then like pretend that you're going to leave. If you move your mouse towards the top of the page, a little thing will click up and it'll be like, boom, 15% off. So it means 15% off of $30, so it's not that much, but hey, every little bit helps, right? So that's my little pro tip for US news rankings. But anyway, so let's think about, first of all, okay, so the rankings are big business. That's why they exist. If the publishers were not making money off of them, they wouldn't bother. Number two, the rankings themselves are not created by business gurus, right? They're not going to Warren Buffett and saying, okay, Warren Buffett, okay, Steve Jobs, okay, Jamie Dimon, head of JP Morgan. Like, what do you think is the best business school? They're not going to business types. Rankings are written by journalists. They're created by journalists who have a deadline, who have a goal, right? Their editor is probably like, this better be good. People better click on it because that's why we pay you. And so I think it's important for you to realize that very few of the journalists who are writing the rankings, probably perhaps even none of them, actually have MBAs themselves. So why is that relevant? Because I think even the ones with the best intentions, even the ones who are like, you know what, I'm not going to care about, what my boss said about getting clicks. I am going to do this out of the, with a pure heart and the purest of intentions. But even that person cannot relate firsthand at all to what the MBA experience is. They've never taken an MBA class. They've never been in a club or participated in a business plan competition. And they've never had to look for an MBA internship or a job. So when they come together and sort of come up with these rankings, they're doing it based on something they have not themselves ever experienced firsthand. So I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind in terms of a grain of salt. So then the other thing that I think you might have noticed, if you start spending time looking at rankings or following rankings or Googling the rankings, I think you'll notice a couple of things. Number one, the rankings change a lot sometimes from year to year, right? They change a lot. And so you might say like, well, that's a little strange. Like if a school one year is 6th and then the next year it's 1st, like can a school as a large educational institution, can it really dramatically change like so much within a 1 to 2, maybe 3-year time frame? And so there are a couple of reasons for this. Number one, some schools are kind of rankings chasers. I hate to say it, but some schools, they are going after the rankings. They are trying to game the rankings just a little bit because so many applicants, like, well, maybe not you after today. Hopefully after today, you'll be a little bit smarter than the average applicant. But most applicants place so much stock into the rankings, and the schools know this. So the schools are like, well, let me do whatever I can to get higher in the rankings. And the reason they do this is because they realize, okay, if we get higher in the rankings, what does that mean for us? Well, it equals an increase in applicants. We're going to get more people applying. They're going to notice our school. Maybe they wouldn't have paid attention to us before, but now they're going to apply. The more people that apply, the lower our acceptance rate gets. The lower our acceptance rate gets, the more elite we look, right? Like, one of the many reasons that Stanford is considered to be a great school is in part because of what Stanford offers, but also when you look at Stanford and you're like, wow, it has a 6% acceptance rate, that immediately in everyone's mind kind of goes like, wow, Stanford, right? So the more people apply, the lower the acceptance rate goes, which means that the school looks more elite. And if the school is more elite, you can, as a school, charge more money to the current students, and they won't complain as much. And not only does that mean that the current students are going to be willing to pay more, but if you as a school attract more candidates, you are more likely to let in higher quality students. Those high quality students go on to become high quality alumni. And those alumni become really successful, and they not only give us money in the future, but more importantly, they end up being on the cover of Wired magazine or whatever, and then people say like, wow, that person's really cool, and oh, look, they went to Wharton, therefore I want to go to Wharton too. So it becomes this kind of positive upward spiral, right? Rinse, repeat. The higher you go in the rankings, it almost becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. So that's why some schools, some more than others, are really like, even the ones who pretend like, oh, we don't lower ourselves to look at the rank. Of course they do. Everyone does. But so some schools are actively out there trying to game the rankings. And so since they're trying to game the rankings, what does that mean to you as an applicant kind of on a pragmatic level? So I don't want to get like all conspiracy theory on you now. Like there are enough conspiracy theories out there. But for example, if a school knows that one facet of the rankings is the average GMAT score, right? The higher our GMAT goes, our average GMAT goes, the higher our ranking is going to be. I have seen some schools, there's one school in particular that comes to mind, that 10 years ago would have accepted certain candidates that today they're looking a lot more at GMAT than they used to. So they are rejecting people today that, say, 5-10 years ago would have been shoo-ins just because of the GMAT, because they're trying to game the GMAT thing, because they're trying to game the rankings. The other one is they might reject people who have career plans that are a little too risky. Again, these are people who might have gotten in previously, but since career placement statistics play into the rankings, and my job, part of my job as an admissions, leader is to try to think about like, okay, one of the things I have to do is I have to try to get us higher in the rankings. Am I going to accept the person who has the crazy cockamamie plan of starting a magical unicorn business? And I don't mean unicorn as in $1 billion business. I mean a literal unicorn, like someone who wants to start a breeding ground for unicorns. That's kind of crazy. Am I going to take a chance on that person as an admissions officer, knowing that they probably aren't going to have a job when they graduate? Maybe I won't. So that's one reason why the rankings change so much, because the schools are trying to game them. There's another reason why the rankings change so much. And this is because we, as human beings, we have an obsession with gossip and buzz and new information coming out, right? That's how Kim Kardashian is able to make a living. If Kim Kardashian just stayed home and was a mom and did, baked cookies and didn't ever post on Instagram and didn't ever do outrageous things, no one would pay attention to her, right? So if the rankings never changed, if they kind of stayed the same from year to year, and if they were the same from publication to publication to publication, then no one would bother even clicking. No one would bring to the site their my precious clicks, because we would all say like, okay, well, we know it's like Stanford, Harvard, Wharton, whatever. And so why would I bother clicking on an article if I know in advance what it's going to say? And if I know it's not going to tell me anything that I don't know already, if it's not going to give me any new information, I'm not going to bother clicking. So also keep in mind, as a savvy consumer, as a smart consumer of these rankings, that the publications themselves have a vested interest in shaking things up, because they want to create controversy. They want to create clicks. If the rankings are kind of boring, no one's going to talk about it. No one's going to care. Versus, I think, this year there was quite a scandal where like one school went from 1st to 6th or something, and everyone was like, oh, does this mean the end of Harvard? And no one would talk about it if Harvard were always 1st or 2nd or 3rd, right? So by moving them around, they get you to click, and that's what they're ultimately looking for. So let's move on and let's dig in just a little bit on what some of these methodologies are. I promised, and I continue to promise, that we're not going to dig in like super detailed, because that would be super boring. But I do think it's important, let's compare two of the most famous or most popular rankings. And I'm going to point out some things that I think are kind of interesting once you start to dig into the weeds. So looking at the US News and World Report ranking methodology. Oh, I just realized that I am in darkness because there is sun coming into my... Sorry, just a second. It's the morning over here, and I am going to close a shade so that way you can see me. Ha ha! I am no longer a shadow ninja. You can now see me again. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so let's talk about the US News methodology. So 40% of the US News methodology comes down to basically reputation, right? They call it the peer assessment, where they ask other heads of business schools, like, how good, who do you think the best schools are? And then they also ask recruiters, like the job recruiters who come to campus, which schools do you like to hire the most from? That makes up 40%. That's almost 50% of the ranking is based on something that is frankly pretty qualitative. Like, how do you, if I'm a recruiter and I say, well, I really love this school, is there a scientific reason for that? So just be aware that right off the bat, about half of the US News ranking is qualitative, someone's opinion. The second bucket is placement success. And this is basically like, how many people have jobs at the end of their graduation or 3 months after graduating, and how much money are they making? And then the student selectivity is 25%. And this is the GMAT GRE, GPA, and then the acceptance rate is only 1%. Now, when I first saw this, I was like, well, that's kind of weird that the acceptance rate is only 1%, because, you would think that it would be higher. But then I realized, well, it's so easy to game the acceptance rate. Like, I can tell you in the undergraduate space, what some of the colleges do is, like, if you score anything even above, like, the low, like a pretty low score on the SAT, a lot of Ivy League schools will start sending you brochures and, like, think about applying to Harvard. And it's like, this person was never getting into Harvard, but because the schools want to up their selectivity rates, they do that. So I think part of the reason why selectivity rate was only 1% is in part because it is kind of easy. You can throw money at that and you can easily manipulate it if you want. And by the way, as long as you improve, it's more about the quality of the funnel that you get of students to have that GMAT and GRE go up, as opposed to how big the funnel is. So right off the bat, one thing that I thought was really interesting was the peer assessment at 25%. So that's a quarter of the ranking is pretty much based on, I don't want to make it sound like it's sort of like a high school clique, like we're in the movie Mean Girls or anything. But I mean, because one school says another school is good, like that person at that school doesn't attend the other school. They don't, you know what I mean? Like, how do they know? They don't live and breathe that school every day. And that's a quarter of the ranking. Holy cow, that's a lot of weight to give to something that is perhaps not super scientific and should not be given a lot of weight at all. Another aside I wanted to make on the US News ranking is that if we look at these things in red, right, recruiter assessment is 15%, salary, bonus, and employment rate. If you add these together, that comes out to 50%. So half of the total of the US News ranking is based upon basically how well do the recruiters or the big companies that come to campus, what do they think about a school? So what does that mean for you as an applicant in terms of, like, again, I know I mentioned this sort of conspiracy theory thing a minute ago, but don't just think that I've got a tinfoil hat and that I should be put into an insane asylum. Well, if you're going to think that, don't think it for this reason. There are several other reasons I could give you, but not for this reason, because let's look on a pragmatic level of what does it mean? What do each of these three things mean, kind of, if we dig into them? So the recruiter assessment is basically saying, when we come to the campus, number one, is this school giving us students we actually want to hire, or are they kind of duds, right? And when we give them an offer, do they accept our offers? So if you're a recruiter and you're spending the time in the pre-COVID days, at least, to fly to a campus, to spend 3 days doing the interviews, you want to make sure that your time is well rewarded and that you actually find people that are good, and that those people, when you offer them the job at the end of the day, they're like, yes, I'm happy to come take your job, instead of saying no, and then you're back at square one. The salary and bonus is frankly saying, how much does the market in a capitalistic society value the graduates of this program? How much are they willing to put their money where their mouth is, and how much are they willing to pay the graduates of this program? And then the employment rate is actually worth more than the salary and bonus, which I think is interesting. And no one asked my opinion, but I wouldn't do it this way. And basically the employment rate is 3 months after graduation, how many people are actually working? And basically another way of looking at this is, how picky are the students? Right? Because if a student comes in and says, well, I'm going to work at a hedge fund, and if I don't get a hedge fund job, forget it. I'm not going to accept anything else unless I get that hedge fund job. Well, guess what? The chances of that person being unemployed 3 months after graduation are pretty high. So if you're an admissions director and you want to help optimize the US News ranking, you're going to focus, instead of necessarily focusing on people who have, like, great leadership skills or all kinds of other nice qualities, 50% of you kind of has to be focused on qualities such as, do I think employers are going to be willing to pay a lot for this person 2 years from now? And do I also want to accept people that I think are really snobby or really full of themselves about their job prospects? Or would I rather accept someone who is more amenable to different opportunities, right? So this plays into your admissions strategy, because if you write in your Why MBA career vision essay, well, the reason I want to get an MBA is because I want to become the CEO of Goldman Sachs when I graduate. And if I don't get that job, forget it. Guess what? You're not going to sound impressive and ambitious. You're going to sound like, oh my gosh, this is a high-risk person. And even if we love everything else about this person, the fact that they're so unrealistic and so they seem like they're going to be really demanding, and they might not take any job that comes their way, maybe we should think twice about letting this person in. So because I wanted to bring this up because if you know that this is something that the schools are thinking about in terms of their US news rankings, I think it helps make the case that, for example, one of the things I advocate very strongly in ApplicantLab.com, and by the way, you can see this yourself in the free trial. You don't even have to pay for it, so you can dig into some more of these lessons that I give. But like, this is why the career vision has to be so logical, because that way you're saying to them, you're showing them, like, I'm the sort of person I am totally going to get hired and I am going to be super happy with all kinds of different jobs. You don't need to worry about me. I am a team player and I will pretty much take anything that comes my way. Okay, so moving on just to another, let's look at a couple of differences real quick. And again, this is not going to be the focus of today because no one wants that. But let's just look at the Financial Times. So the Financial Times, the career element is 63%, but they look at it a little bit differently. So they also look at the alumni salary. That's 20%. Salary here is 14%. But one of the things that the Financial Times look at, which is really interesting, is how much of a bump up did someone get? I mean, that matters. How much the bump is, that kind of percentage increase, matters almost as much as what was the salary to begin with. So right off the bat, I want you to be a little bit hesitant about this, because then, hold on, if I'm trying to optimize my school for the Financial Times rankings, maybe I should let in people who are high potential, but currently maybe aren't making as much money. Versus if I'm trying to optimize for rankings that don't care at all what the pre-MBA salary was, then I'm going to let in people who are already making $150,000, $200,000 a year or more. I'm not going to say, well, man, I'm not going to let in that PE associate because they're already making $200,000 a year, and so that bump up's not going to be that high. Like, that part is not going to enter my mind as an admissions director. So I think that's an interesting little thing to think about. I don't think that should matter as much, but maybe it matters to you if you're currently sort of at a lower salary level and you're trying to get that maximum multiple or increase. And then they have 20% on what I call, they don't call it this is my term, diversity and global stuff. So this is like percentage of women, percentage of international faculty, how many women are on the board, how many international people are on the board. And this is kind of an interesting one because this is 20% of the rankings when you add it up. And some schools, like if you could be an excellent business school in a certain country that has an amazing placement record within your country, but you're going to be penalized pretty heavily in the Financial Times rankings only because you're hiring people to teach in your program who are from your country and not necessarily looking for international faculty. Now, I think international faculty is super useful because we live in an increasingly global society, and it's important for all people in a business school to have sort of this global outlook. But at the same time, I don't know that I think that this should count for 20%. For me, I just want the best teachers possible. If that person happens to be a woman or if they happen to be from another country, cool, great. But for me, the fact that they're from a different country or they're a certain gender, I don't know. Not a big fan. As you can you tell that I'm not like a huge fan of the Financial Times ranking? Anyway, tell us how you really feel, Maria. We're so confused. You're never a sharpshooter, Maria. You definitely don't wear your opinions on your sleeve. Okay, and then the other random bucket is like how many people on the faculty have doctorates. So I also think this is kind of weird because, yeah, it's cool that they have PhDs, but for me, some of the best business school professors I had were people who didn't have PhDs, but who had 30 years of experience in business. Because people with PhDs are really smart, but they've also probably never actually worked in business. So that's something else to keep in mind. And then the research rank, 10% goes to what kind of research the school outputs. And so I just kind of feel like, well, this animation is going to appear in a second. Like, I guess, like, if someone's really good at sitting around writing a research paper, that's cool. But for me, the MBA, what separates the MBA from, say, a master's in economics is that the economics degree is more theoretical and MBA is a more pragmatic degree. That's one of the biggest differences between those two degrees. And so for me, as a pragmatist, I guess I'm interested in the research, but I'd rather have someone who has lived it, who's a really good teacher, versus someone who's really good at sitting alone in an office and digging through tons of data and coming up with a report about it. So show me the money, 20%. Oh yeah, the employment rate at 3 months. This is another one I meant to mention a second ago. It's only 2%. And for US News, it's 21%. Wow, that's a pretty big difference. And then research, I don't personally care about research. I think some of the best professors I've ever had have done no research. And conversely, some of the best research professors I've ever had who were really good at research were actually terrible in the classroom. So that's just me. And so just real quick, let's look side by side. The point of this slide here is I want to show you how it's all over the place. So on the left, we've got US News. In the middle, we've got Financial Times. And on the right, we've got The Economist. So for example, US News has Harvard Business School at 6th, but they're first in the Financial Times. Like, does that, I don't know, should we suddenly say like, oh man, HBS is 6th now. I was going to go there, but now I don't know. Like, on a pragmatic level, is that going to really impact which school you choose? Stanford is first for US News, but they're 8th for The Economist. And then finally, one thing that I thought was interesting was that The Economist at UCLA is 6th. I actually think this is really smart. I think UCLA is one of the most undervalued programs out there. I think Alex Lawrence and the whole team there are super nice, and their career services is actually amazing in terms of career switchers. So I really appreciate the fact that The Economist is looking at UCLA, but UCLA is 6th in The Economist, and they're not even in the top 15 at all for either US News or, let me skim, I'm pretty sure it's not for fun. Yeah, it's not even on the top 15. So basically the point is, if you are a person who's like, I'm going to go by the rankings because the rankings are the only thing that matters to me. Well, okay, which rankings? They all differ completely. And isn't the fact that they differ so much, should this not be a cause for suspicion? If the rankings were really like the word from on high and something that we should all like, just put all of our faith into and worship at the altar of the rankings, then they would all be the same, or they would all be pretty similar. But the fact that they're so different, I think, should also help us have a healthy dose of skepticism in terms of obsessing over them. Okay, so now I want to take a step back and I want to ask you, why do you even want to go to business school to begin with? And you can be honest. Like, I know, like, you're like, oh, it's because I want to take a class in negotiation so that I can improve my soft skills. Yeah. No. That's fine. That's great. But what's the real reason you want to go to business school? I won't tell anyone. It'll be our little secret. But it's probably jobs. You probably are going to business school because you either want to get a different job, or you want to stay in a similar job that you have now, but you want to do it at a higher level, or you want to be better at it. At the end of the day, you go to business school for jobs. So I want you, as you enter this process and as you start thinking about your school selection, I want you to keep your eyes on the prize. The eyes on the prize is jobs. It's career advancement. Let's be honest. All the other stuff is great, but let's be honest, it's really career advancement. So I'm going to give you, in the next few slides, some illustrative examples of how much these schools differ in very pragmatic terms. And by that, I mean, you can take, say, the top 10 schools in the rankings. And when you're like an undergraduate, for example, things are pretty similar, like organic chemistry, let's say. Organic chemistry is organic chemistry, right? You're going to learn organic chemistry pretty much the same if you go to a state college versus if you go to MIT. I mean, it'll probably be harder at MIT and stuff, but it's not like the laws of organic chemistry fundamentally change from school to school. So if you major in chemistry at one college, it's probably going to be a similar academic experience in terms of what is taught from one school to another. But in business schools, it's very different. Most business schools are almost identical in terms of what they call the core. The core is what? It's that general management foundation that you get at the beginning of your MBA education. The core is normally about 1 semester long. So if we think that most 2-year business programs are 2 semesters, so it's about one quarter of your program is, for most people, is going to be devoted to the core. So yes, most schools have the same core. That involves an introduction to finance, marketing, accounting, operations. They want to make sure that if you graduate, you can hold your own in a discussion in any kind of general management topic. But once you move past the core, and once you start looking at the specializations and you really start digging into them, because again, you need to be an informed consumer, because frankly, if you get in, you might have to take out $200,000 US worth of loans. So this is not, I always kind of think it's funny that, like, I feel like sometimes, and this isn't you, but I feel like sometimes I meet people who are so obsessed with the rankings that, like, I feel like they would spend more time researching like a car that they're going to buy, or a laptop that they're going to buy, or I don't know, a vacuum cleaner that they're going to buy, right? They might spend like hours and hours poring over all the different, and then when it comes to their MBA, which is for most people one of the largest investments they're ever going to make, they're like, yeah, I'm just going to go buy the rankings. And it's like, what? And like, you could buy a house for the cost of an MBA. Well, not here in Los Angeles, but in many places you could. An MBA is going to be probably one of the most expensive things you ever purchase. So please bear with me as we go through this exercise, because you owe it to yourself to be an informed consumer. So let's say you want to go to business school to enter real estate. I want you to start digging into the electives that are offered for just one example, real estate. So here on the left, we've got one school's offerings in real estate. You can see that beyond their core, they have 3 classes in real estate. And then that's a top 10 school. And then on the right, we've got 3 electives. There we go. And then on the right, we've got another top 10 school. And they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This other school has 11 electives in real estate. So let me ask you, if your whole point of going to an MBA is for career advancement, and the career you want to get into is real estate, and let's say you don't have a whole lot of background experience, I should say, in real estate, but you know that to get that real estate job, you're going to have to do well in the interviews. And by the way, it's not just about getting the job. Once you get the job, you have to be good at the job. Otherwise, they're going to fire you or you're not going to advance. And so then what was the point? So it's not just about getting the job. It's also about being good at that job. So which of these 2 schools do you think would better prepare a novice to really kick butt in that post-MBA job in real estate? It's not a trick question. I think the school on the right, because they have almost 4 times as many classes. Here's the thing, though. The school on the left is Harvard Business School's real estate offerings, and the school on the right is Columbia Business School. So if you look at if you just go by the rankings and you're like, whatever, it's just about the rankings, you would say, well, Harvard's the school for me. Definitely better than Columbia. And there are many other reasons that might be true. But if your primary goal is to get into real estate, I would argue that the school like Columbia is probably going to prepare you in a much more rigorous and thorough way to succeed in that post-MBA job. Here's another example, healthcare. Let's say you've decided that healthcare is where you want to go in your career. It's what you want to do. So here's one top 10 school. This is the career outcomes report. This is like, where do our graduates go in the world in terms of industry? And then here's another school. So you'll notice that healthcare here is 1% of the class. And then here, this other school is 19% of the class. So why should that matter to you if you're interested in healthcare? Well, it should. I'm not saying it's the only thing that should matter, but I am saying it should matter quite a bit, because when you think about it, if a school has 19% of the class going into healthcare, what does that say? It says a couple of things. Number one, it says that the career office probably has a ton of friendly relationships with healthcare recruiters. It means that the healthcare industry, when they think of this school, think, oh, you know what? We want to go recruit there, because we know that if we waste our time, if we invest our time into interviewing candidates from this school, we know we're going to get a good return. So again, think of that cycle, that kind of positive reinforcement cycle. If a school gets famous for healthcare, the more healthcare companies are going to go there, the more famous it's going to get for healthcare, the more healthcare companies are going to go there, and it just keeps repeating. So number one, it tells you about the career services office and where they are focused and where they have strong relationships. Number two, when a school has 19% of its people going into healthcare, that says to you also that 19% of your classmates are going into a field that you're interested in. So that means that your network coming out of the school, instead of just 1% of your network being useful and going out into the world and getting jobs in the healthcare field that you want to go into, there's a 1 out of 5 chance that one of your friends at this other school will one day be able to help you if you stay in the healthcare field, right? So again, this is not like the only thing. Oh, Maria said that the only thing we should think. No, I'm not saying this is the only thing to think about. What I'm trying to do here is to get you to expand your mind. And again, to think critically, to start digging into the classes and the career outcomes, because they vary tremendously by school. The school on the left is Chicago Booth, arguably by some the best school, number 1 school in many of the rankings. The school on the right is Vanderbilt Owen. I don't even think Vanderbilt is maybe even in the top 15 list that we just saw a minute ago. So you might be saying like, oh, I really want to go to healthcare. Well, guess what? Like once you start digging into these career reports and you start digging into the classes and stuff, you're going to start realizing like, oh my gosh, if I want to go work for a pharmaceutical company or a hospital management company or a health insurance company, can Booth get me there? Of course Booth can get you there. But can Vanderbilt get you there? Oh my gosh, they might get you just as much there, if not maybe even a slightly better outcome for you from the career front. Now let's look at the exact same schools for consulting, right? Consulting, one of the most, if not the most popular, certainly one of the most popular career destinations for people. So now let's look at Booth. 33% of the class, let's say it's 1/3, goes into consulting. But wait a minute, at Vanderbilt, 27% of the class goes into consulting. So it's not like, oh my gosh, there's a dramatic, Booth is ranked number 1 and Vanderbilt is, I don't know where they are, but they're not in the top 10. So, oh my God, if I want to go to consulting, I have to go to Booth, because if it's not one of these top schools, I'm never getting a job in consulting. Hold on. Almost, yeah, 27 is lower than 34. If we round up to 33.7, it gets 34. So 27 is less, but it's not like dramatically less. It's not like you say like, well, Booth is ranked 1 and Vanderbilt's ranked, let's just call it 18th or something. So therefore I am 18%, or I'm 18 times less likely to get a job in consulting if I go. No, it's not like a linear thing. Your career outcome can still be pretty good even if you don't go to a fancy school. Now, yes, will the firms be slightly different in terms of which firms come in to recruit? Will the fancier, snootier firms focus on the fancier, snootier school? Sure. But sometimes the fancier, snootier firms have a worse work-life balance. Sometimes they make you work a lot harder. Sometimes, like that's not the be-all and end-all. If you're truly interested in consulting, there are lots of different ways to get there. And to be very honest with you, I recently had the opportunity to be on an interview podcast with the global head of recruiting for Bain Consulting. And he basically said, look, we don't have like a quota per each school. We don't have basically, if we go to recruit at a school, once you get in front of us for the interview, it comes down to how well you do in the interview. That's pretty much it. So if they were to go, this is unlikely, but if they were to go to Booth and recruit and everyone shows up for their interviews and they're not prepared and they don't know how to do a case and they flub that, guess what? They're not going to get hired as much as people from other schools. So the point is, if something like consulting is your goal, there are so many different ways to get there than just obsessing over the tippity top schools. There are differences. I'm not saying there aren't. But it's not like, whoa, if I don't get into Booth, that's it. Forget it. I'm never becoming a consultant and my life is over. Hold on. Not so much. Other things you might want to think about when you're thinking about your schools is geography. So immigration policies, unfortunately, are becoming a much bigger topic that you're going to have to really take into mind. I don't want to get political, but frankly, if Trump wins again and he does end up doing away with the H-1B process and he ends up being horrible to he's not horrible to OPT yet. Let's hope that stays the same. But he's running on an anti-immigrant platform, and so if he gets elected again, he's probably going to take steps towards that. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. The ease of hiring. So here's an interesting example from the Financial Times report. I don't know how you say it, SEABS. That's the China European Business School. It's in Shanghai, and then ESA is in Barcelona. So you might say like, oh, well, SEABS is higher on the ranking, so I should probably prioritize that. But hold on, if you don't speak Chinese, you're not, you could go to business school in China, but if you don't speak Chinese, it's going to be really hard for you to get a job in China. And if you speak Spanish, it'll be much easier for you to get a job in Spain. So that's something else to keep in mind for the schools that are based in non-English speaking countries. The school will be taught in English, but the job opportunities may not be available. So that's why some of the European programs actually ask you to start studying. By the way, if you're interested in a European program or like a SEABS and you think you're going to apply there and you're like, I'm totally into ESA, I really want to go to IE or whatever, like start studying Spanish now. So that way when you apply, you can say, look, I've already started studying Spanish, and that'll help allay their fears about your employability. The cost of living is also something that you might want to think about, right? Going to school in New York City is a lot more expensive than going to school in Ann Arbor. And if you are price sensitive and you want to take out as few loans as possible, there's a pretty dramatic difference in terms of what a one-bedroom apartment will cost in New York City versus in, say, Michigan. The weather, if you're me, the weather matters a lot. I don't like winter, so you're like, it's only 2 years. I know it's only 2 years, but for me, too many winters is too many. You also want to think about the cost to get a degree. So another reason why I really want you to seriously look into the quote unquote lower ranked schools and not turn up your nose at them and not be sort of snooty patooty about it is because oftentimes the lower ranked programs, to attract the higher level candidates, the sort of stronger candidates with the higher GMAT scores and the great leadership backgrounds, they might be more willing to throw money at you in terms of scholarships. So if you are like super price sensitive, look, apply to Sloan, apply to MIT, but realize that you might have to take out $220,000 of loans versus you could get a pretty good education, a very good education, frankly, at other schools. As we just saw in the previous slide, you can probably get very similar career outcomes, not totally the same, but again, we're not, it doesn't have to be like this dramatic difference. Like you either, if you go to MIT, you get a job. And then if you go someplace else, you never get a job again. Like it's not binary, right? It's along a spectrum. And so you might get more scholarships at a lower ranked program. So keep that in mind. And maybe happiness, right? Like, really start looking at, does a school focus on quantitative stuff? Am I going to be doing statistical analyses all day long? Maybe that makes your heart jump with joy. Maybe it makes you want to take a nap and watch Netflix instead. So these differences are also there and they are worth taking into consideration. Okay, so what does this all mean, Maria? So I think you should totally use rankings as a starting point. I think it can be useful, especially when the rankings, how do I say this? It's not even about what the ranking itself is, but more around what data do the rankings articles provide to you. I think that's a big takeaway. Because if what's interesting to you is like, I want that percentage increase bump, then pay more attention to the Financial Times rankings. Or even in the Financial Times rankings themselves, they have the different columns of all the different data. They actually have the column for what's like the increase in pre-MBA salary versus post-MBA salary. If that's what matters to you, be an informed consumer. Use the rankings to collect the data on the things that matter to you, and not just as a shallow, like, well, this school is ranked 4th, so it's definitely a better choice for me than this other school that's ranked 10th, right? That's what I want you to avoid, that sort of thinking, because I think there are a lot of suboptimal outcomes out there where people obsess over the rankings. It's almost like, I don't know, I'm going to make like a relationship analogy here. It's almost like, do you marry for love or do you marry for money? Like some people out there might be like, I just want to marry someone who is rich. Show me, show me that trust fund, baby. Okay, that's one way to look at marriage, but is that maybe a shallow, like, should the shallow reason be the only thing you look at? I hope not. So I think the rankings are useful in terms of the data they give you. And I think it can be a useful starting point for you trying to determine your own selectivity to a program. So, for example, especially if they publish, like I think the US News Rankings publish, what are the scores, like the average scores, right off the bat. The scores are not the be all and end all, but they are an important metric for you to sort of, kind of like gauge roughly how competitive are you. If your scores are really not at all competitive, I'm not saying don't apply to the program, but maybe consider it a reach or a reachy reach, and then, optimize your risk a little bit better by applying to more schools that might not be quite as competitive. Side note, if you are from an overrepresented group, AKA, let's say Indian engineers, you do need to roughly add 20 to 30 points to a school's average to determine your selectivity. So if a school's average is 700 and you have a 700, but you're from an overrepresented group, your score is not necessarily super competitive. You need to have, say, a 720 or 730 to be competitive on average, all else being equal, at a school with a 700. And that is, I feel like I've talked about that in other videos, so I won't dig into that again. But then after you sort of start collecting this initial data, I really want you to do your homework. Look at the differences in the academics. Look at the differences in the career focus. There are lots of differences, but there are also, like, in terms of the big picture, in terms of like, will an MBA program help you get a better career? Will it make you better at your job in the future? Probably yes. So don't get too snobby, because sometimes I've seen it happen. The reason I'm so passionate about this is I've seen people do this. I've seen people be like, I don't know, Maria, like, I really want to go into sports analytics. And MIT has like sports analytics classes, and they have a sports analytics conference, and they bring all of the major sports teams to campus on this conference. And it's really, it helps you get a job. But I got into this other school that's a little bit more highly ranked, so I don't know. It's like, oh, come on. And here's how I want you to think about this. Here's my wrapping up conclusion. We as human beings, we try to optimize everything in life. It's just who we are. It's how our brains work. Thanks a lot, amygdala. That's part of our sort of the lizard brain, the amygdala. I should have a lizard appearing at some point. So it's understandable that as human beings, we want the shortcut. We want the easy, the rank. I just want to look at the rank. Just tell me, Maria, what schools to apply to and leave me alone and let me do my thing. It's not that easy. So it's understandable that we do it and that people obsess over it. Oh, there's my lizard brain. Okay. But I want you to think of it this way. I don't want you to think of rankings in terms of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want you to think of it more in terms of buckets of programs, in terms of what's appealing for you, what's going to get you where you want to go, and where are you competitive. Because, for example, here's my I'm going to use a sports analogy. And I'm not a huge sports person, but I hope my analogy works. We could sit around and we could spend hours and we could debate who is the best basketball player. Was it Michael Jordan? Is it LeBron James? Was it Kobe? May he rest in peace. We could sit here and we could obsess over stats. And is it free throw percentage, or is it three-pointer percentage, or is it points per game? Like, how are we going to rank these different players? Like, well, if you rank it on this, then LeBron's in first. But then if you could, yeah, sure, you could do that. You could drive yourself crazy. Go ahead. The problem is, at the end of the day, if you get any of those people onto your pickup basketball league, you're going to crush it. Right? So if any of them, maybe Michael Jordan is, better than LeBron James. But if LeBron James shows up to your weekly basketball league and is like, hey, if LeBron James came to me and was like, Maria, I want to join your team, I would be like, yes. Right? The fact that he, would I say like, oh, you know what, man, I'm sorry. You're just below Michael Jordan. So I'm not going to do it. No, of course not. You're still going to win if you have an amazing player on your team. Similarly, you're still going to win in your career if you go to a whole bunch of there's a whole swath of schools that can get you where you want to go. So there's Michael Jordan. And then here's the other point. This is the point I was trying to make in terms of the classes and the clubs and the career outcomes. I will totally win if I have Michael Jordan on my team if I'm playing basketball. But if we're talking about a different sport altogether, like, say, horseback riding, maybe Michael Jordan is terrible at horseback riding. And this part of the analogy is maybe a school that is amazing for jobs in, say, technology is terrible for jobs in, say, human resources. The school that's really good for jobs in consulting is not as strong in finance, and vice versa. So I think your goal should be figure out which schools you're competitive to, and then from there figure out where it's going to get you to the team you want to play on, and not just obsessing over silly things like stats. So that, guys, is my take on rankings and what I think you should or should not pay attention to. And I am just saying this based on years of seeing people either I've just seen people shoot themselves in the foot. They get so obsessed over it that they make the wrong choices, and that's sad for all parties involved. Okay. Hi, Maria. What are the necessary factors you think are important to select a college irrespective of the ranking? How do you know which is the right set of colleges? So I think I hope I was able to touch upon this just a little bit. But I think the most important factors, I think, is at the end of the day, let's face it, you're going to business school to improve your career. So I think if you only have time to really on your own look at one thing, really look at those career outcomes. Look at every school has to, I think, in order to be AACSB accredited or whatever that acronym is, I think they all are required to publish their career outcomes every year. So look at those career reports and ask yourself, like, okay, is this school going to get me where I want to go? And then another way to do that I didn't touch upon earlier, but that is another tip that I often give people, is reach out to the current students at the different clubs. So if you're interested in healthcare, reach out to the healthcare club at 10 different schools. See if you can sort of send them like, hey, here's my background. I'm interested in getting into this career. couple quick things about me. What do you think? Like, have other people like me who have gone to your school been able to make that jump? And some of them might say, absolutely, right? Like for investing, for example, like you might not think of UCLA and Ross, for example, as schools for investing, but those schools, both of those schools have very, very hands-on activities where as a student, you can actually manage an investment portfolio. Not like a pretend portfolio, like you're actually managing a real portfolio. So that way, when you go to apply for a portfolio management job, you're not just saying, well, I studied it in a class. You're saying, well, I actually managed a portfolio. And I actually told us to buy Google stock 6 months ago, and it's up 13%. And thank you very much. Right. So reach out to the students at the schools also, because they will tell you the real info, right? They're not going to be like, well, actually, they'll be able to say like, well, actually, I'm in the investment management club and I used to work as a Hollywood producer and now I'm working in investment management and this is cool. So aside from the things I already mentioned, also talk to the students at the clubs. What about the impact of Brexit in the UK on MBA jobs? Vinay, that's a great question. I think that's anyone's guess. I don't know. The world is a mess, Vinay. That's my advice to you. No, that's not useful. Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you get an MBA in the UK in the past, that would have given you a lot of geographic flexibility and vice versa, right? You could have gotten an MBA in France, but then tried to get a job in London. Now with Brexit, my understanding, and I'm not an immigration attorney expert, but my understanding is going to be harder. So you should definitely think about that. You need to look into the EU versus UK immigration requirements and sort of say like, okay, which one do I think is more likely? And also with the European Union, as I mentioned before, like I've had a lot of people get into ESA and IE and some of the schools in Spain, and they want to stay in Spain afterwards, but they don't speak Spanish or they don't speak it well enough to get hired. And so that's another consideration. So yeah, I don't think Brexit's a good idea. I mean, I'm a globalist, so of course I'm not pro Brexit. I think it's going to make things harder in both directions. So mid-career professionals such as myself who did an MBA at 35. You did an MBA at 35. So if you already, okay, I need to read the rest of the question because I'm like, if you already did an MBA, what's happening? Okay, how much of a factor are rankings in the broader scope? I can imagine geography and program specialization would factor much more importantly. Postgraduate salary seem to be more important for those with 10 plus years experience. Craig, I'm not entirely sure that I understand your question. So first of all, you mean you're going to do an MBA at the age of 35, right? Is that what you're saying? Like, because if you already did an MBA, I'm guessing you already did an MBA. So let's say that your question is, I'm 35 and I want to apply for an MBA program. So how much should I think about rankings? So yeah, so geography, especially for older candidates, especially people who have like established like families and the kids are in school, you need to think about, do I want to uproot my family for a year or two? I said a year because normally people who are 35 have a harder time getting into 2-year programs. There are sort of 1-year specialty degrees out there like the Sloan Fellows program or the Stanford MSX program or the Kellogg 1-year MBA that tend to be a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more amenable to more seasoned candidates. But yeah, like for example, if you know where you want to live, let's say you want to live here in Los Angeles, welcome. Happy to have you here where I live. If you want to live in LA for the rest of your life, go to UCLA or USC. Like, why would you, like, sure, is there a big HBS network out here in LA? There's a network. Is it huge? Not really. Is the USC network way huger? You bet it is. So in terms of if you're on the older side and you're looking at the degree more for pragmatic reasons, like first of all, I want to learn the MBA stuff so that I can advance in my career. Normally when people are older, they're beyond the age of making the career switch. And then for them, it's more about, I like what I'm doing. I just want to be better at it. In that case, because the classes are going to be so similar from school to school, it's a lot less important. You don't need to worry so much about the career report because you're probably looking at it from more of I want to learn the material to get better at my job, in which case some of these considerations that I talked about before shouldn't matter. I think it should be more like in my neighborhood, in my area, if I want to continue living in, say, the Midwest, a school like, for example, Notre Dame's business school is not considered to be like a tippy top school. But if you want to live in Indiana, guess what? Notre Dame alums are everywhere, right? So I think geography would play more into an older candidate's decision making. Hi, Maria. What if my country, most of the companies only know the universities like Harvard, Oxford, and Cambridge? So, Ashkar, this is a good question. I think this is where I think it might be beneficial to take a few minutes and think about like, okay, what career options do I want out of business school, and what do I think is realistic for my career out of business school? In your country, they might only have heard of Harvard, Oxford, and Cambridge, the hiring managers. But if you get a job, say at a multinational corporation out of business school, let's say you go to a USC and you get a job at, I don't know, Boeing. I'm trying to think of like other LA people, other LA industries that are not just entertainment. I think like one of the big aerospace companies is here. Let's say you get a job at this international aerospace company, and then a few years later they transfer you to another country. Like, does it matter if the hiring manager has heard of your school? Because if you get the job anyway out of business school, and the job out of business school is the thing that then connects you to the rest of your career, you know, after the first few jobs, the MBA doesn't really matter, right? After the first few jobs, it's what you accomplished in your previous career that matters, right? So when someone's hiring for a real estate investor who is 10 years out of their MBA, they might be interested in, oh, what school this person went to. But if someone went to Harvard and they have just been a terrible real estate investor and all they do is lose money, and someone else went to, you know, Indiana and has been super successful and has an ROI of 4 million %, guess what? Guess who's going to get the job? So I would take a more sort of long-term view of your career and think about like, okay, you know, because hopefully Trump will not destroy the OPT process. OPT is what lets you stay for like between 1 to 3 years in the US after your business school program. So that's 1 to 3 years of experience you can get at a company here in the US, for example. And then ask yourself, okay, so will the company experience help me then get a job back in my home country? You know, like I would take a longer term view of these things. And I would also say that a lot of the top business schools, since a lot of the top programs have, at least in the US, they tend to have sort of a 30 to 35% international student body. The alumni networks in some of these countries might be really pretty strong, right? So maybe a lot of people in India haven't heard of, you know, if you say Kellogg to the average person in the street, they might be like, oh, it's a breakfast cereal company. But does it really matter if that Kellogg job gets you a job at McKinsey and then McKinsey helps you get back? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if I'm articulating this well, but I think that's part of it. But the people who matter know which schools are big schools. And if someone is hiring you and they're just looking at the name of the school, then are they really well educated in what the different MBA? Let me put it this way. Someone who's hiring MBAs on a regular basis is going to know which MBA schools are better. Does that make sense? Like if someone's hiring engineers, let's say someone's from India and you're hiring engineers, like you're going to know. Like I in the US, I had never heard of the school IIT until I started doing this for a living. Never in my life. I'd never heard of IIT. So if you would have applied for a job with me as an engineer and your resume would have said IIT, I would have been like, okay, whatever, who cares? But in India, people who know India and people who know engineering know that IIT is the best. It's the same thing with MBA recruiters. Like if somebody is hiring for an MBA job, that person is going to be familiar with the fact that like, yeah, Oxford and Cambridge are great, but you know, a school like Kellogg with its funny little name is actually a better is actually a really strong program too. So I would sort of think about the broader picture in that case. Any other questions? The piano, 30-second gig. Piyush, I appreciate your, I am flattered that you think that I can play the piano. I will take that as a compliment. I am not musical at all. The piano is, in fact, my husband's. And so maybe next time we can get him to play. No, I'm just kidding. He would kill me. He wouldn't be my husband for long if I made him come on a GMAT Club thing and play the piano. Yeah, because we're all doing work from home now. I used to have like a nicer place to do these things. I used to have like a little co-working space, but now that's closed because COVID. So this is my sort of my home office and the piano, and I don't play it. Sorry, baby. Sorry, sweetie pie. I can't. I'm terrible. That's it, Maria. Any final thoughts? I don't think so. I just think rankings are a good place to start, but don't kill yourself over them, because I think there's a lot more to this decision, and I want you to be a savvy consumer because it is a big investment. So think broader when you're making the decision of which school you want to attend. Thank you so much, everyone. If this was useful for you, again, please give me a like on the video at the bottom, because then that tells GMAT Club that we like Maria, and then they'll ask me to come back. It's that transactional. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. And please reach out, support@ApplicantLab.com if you've got any questions. Oh, yes. And please, Applicant Lab, start your free trial. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. You're better at marketing my own business than I am. Thank you for that. ApplicantLab.com. It's the low-cost alternative to expensive admissions consultants. All right. Thank you, everyone.